Hello, church. Great to be with you again as we continue our study in the book of Daniel. And I have entitled this lesson or this series, The God Who Rules the Nations. And I got to tell you, we're almost done with Daniel. I think we've got just one more class, and then we're going to be finished with the book of Daniel. And then we're going to move on to the gospel accounts with the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And then we're going to move on from there to the book of Revelation. So Revelation's coming soon. So get ready. We're moving there. All right, here's our memory verses today, and they are different. I've been kind of bouncing around from some different verses for us to memorize. But I want you to think about these verses as we go through the book of Daniel today. It comes out of the book of Isaiah, chapter 55. I really love these verses. They really speak volumes. God says in verse 8, he says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and it does not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but it will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." So God says here, my ways are not your ways. My thoughts aren't your thoughts. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts. Now, I just got to tell you, when I look at the cross, just from a human aspect, it doesn't make sense. But when you look at it from a godly aspect, and you look at it through God's eyes, it makes total sense. God's ways are higher than our ways. When you go to Michigan, especially me living in Michigan for so many years, and I remember all those winters up there, and there were some winters where the snow was so heavy that you couldn't even see the stop sign when you pulled up the road. It was totally buried in snow. And you had to look around the corner, just barely look around the corner, just inch your car out there just a little bit to see if there was a car coming. And I didn't want all that snow. But the farmers told me, no, James, there are nutrients only found in snow that go down into the ground, that we wouldn't have certain crops in Michigan if it wasn't for that snow. So it's needed. Now, it doesn't make any sense to me having all that snow, but I want to be able to eat. I want to be able to live. And so God had a purpose in it. And it's the same way with his word. He wants his word to go out, and when it goes out, it will not return to me void. It will not return to me empty. It will accomplish what God desires. So think about that as we go through the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation and the destruction of Jerusalem, that God's ways are higher than ours. Okay, so last week we went through the first half of Daniel chapter 9. Never made it to the second half, okay? And in that, we're reminded of a prophecy that was being fulfilled at the time of Daniel 9. It was a 70-year captivity. If you remember our classes before, Jeremiah had predicted that the Babylonians would come in and they would be in captivity for 70 years. But at the end of the 70 years, he would bring them back to Israel. Okay? Well, that prophecy worked out just perfectly, because that was the first exile in 605 BC. That's when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go to Babylon. Okay? And sure enough, here's Daniel praying, and at the end of that 70 years, it's fulfilled, and they went home. So Daniel starts to pray. He starts to pray and say, hey, God, time's up. We get to go home. Fulfill your prophecy. Remember your prophecy. And what does he pray in his prayer? His main focus is on the temple. Because what has happened to that temple back in Jerusalem? Remember, they're over in Babylon. The temple has been destroyed. Well, what goes on in the temple? Well, that's where worship goes on. God is seen as being in the back part of this building right here, being in the Holy of Holies, right? There's a curtain that separates them from keeping man out, except for the high priest once a year. And so all of that has went away. And so Daniel's like, we got to get back. We got to get back. So please, Lord, please fulfill your promises. That's Daniel's prayer. And we know that the temple was destroyed for the first time in 586 BC when the Babylonians came in and totally destroyed it. That brings us to the second half of Daniel chapter 9. And in this part, Daniel is going to get his answer to the prayer. Okay? Now don't get jealous here, because, boy, we'd love to have an angel come and tell us the exact answer to all of our prayers. I think sometimes we would. Maybe not all the time. So this is another prophecy. In the first half of the chapter, the 70-year captivity is being fulfilled. In the second part, here starts a new prophecy. This also has the number 7 in it. And we're going to study this, that numbers have meanings, okay, in the Bible. And this is called the 70 weeks, or depending on your translation, the 77 prophecy. Okay? So, watch what happens. Verse 20. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, for making my request to the Lord my God for his holy hill, right? That holy hill is Jerusalem. That's where the temple sits, right? While I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in an earlier vision, okay, he's already been in the book of Daniel, came to me in swift light about the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. Oh boy, that's wonderful, isn't it? As soon as you began to pray, an answer was given, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore consider the message and understand the vision. So here is the answer to his prayer. This is what you request. Let me give you the answer. But I kind of look at this as like Jesus with the woman at the well. It's like the woman at the well in John 4 wanted to talk about this, but Jesus was like, yeah, but let me add a few things that you really need to know. Well, that's what's going to happen here. He's going to answer his prayer. He's going to give him his answer. And then he's going to add some other things that he really needs to know. So watch this. Verse 24. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy hill. Okay. Now we're dealing with 77s. Before was 70-year prophecy. Now we're moving into 77s. And again, numbers in the Bible have meanings. Okay. And we're going to look at that. You've got a handout on that. Should be right here online, or there's several here at the church building on the front table by the foyer for you to get. But we're going to talk about numbers and their meanings. So 77s are decreed for your people and your holy hill to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So when we look at this, the 77s, here's all the things that are going to happen within that prophecy. To finish transgressions, to put an end to sin. When was sin put an end to? To atone for wickedness. When did that take place? To bring in everlasting righteousness. When did that take place? To seal up vision and prophecy. And to anoint the most holy. When did all these things take place? Well, they all took place during the 77s. Okay? All of that, and even more that we're going to see, more detail is going to be given in just a minute, is going to happen within the 77s. Okay? Verse 25. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Remember, What did we see last week? When Daniel sits here and prays, God, let your temple be rebuilt, right? What is happening? The Medo-Persians are coming in, okay? Medo-Persians. And the Persian king, who rules simultaneously with the Medo-Persian, where the Medes, he comes in, King Cyrus, and issues a decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. And he says everybody can go home, and you guys can get money from me and others to build it. Well, that's the issuing of the decree. So that's the starting point of this prophecy. So from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, that's what Daniel was after, right? He wanted to know when the temple was going to be rebuilt. Until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, watch this, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be built with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. Here's his answer. Okay, now watch this. So here's the 77s. It's split into 3 parts. There'll be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. What's 62 plus 7? 69. And then that leaves one more. There's 1 7. So in this prophecy, there will be 3 sections. 7, 62, and 1. Okay? Follow me on that. Don't let me lose you. So, what is going to happen in the 7 sevens, the first batch of sevens? The decree to rebuild Jerusalem. That's King Cyrus. We see the prophecy of it in Isaiah and the fulfillment in Ezra. So there's your starting point, the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Okay? And that happened in 539 BC when King Cyrus first took rule. It says in his first year in Ezra, that's when he gave that decree. Okay? So there's a starting point. Then what's going to happen? That temple will be rebuilt. That's going to happen in Ezra chapter 3. But it's going to take them a few years. You know how God's people can be slow. So that's not actually going to take place until about 516 BC, where the temple is actually finished. And then it says it's going to be built in times of trouble. And this is when we jump over to Ezra 4 and Nehemiah chapters 4 through 6. And this is where the city is going to be built. And when you specifically read in the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah is going to tell us that, hey, there's going to be a lot of persecution. They're going to have a trowel in one hand, fixing the wall, and in the other there's going to be a spear because they're going to have to fight off enemies. But eventually it will all be rebuilt. So within that first set of 7 sevens, all these things are going to happen. The decree to build it, but it's going to be built in times of trouble, but it will be rebuilt. Well, that's what Daniel was after. Great. Wonderful. And then he says, then there will be 62 sevens. Now, nothing is told in this prophecy about what's going to happen during those 62 sevens. It's just a blank period of time. So there's one end, and then that's going to bring us to the other end. Okay? So are you following me here? Okay? So Daniel got his answer. But wait a minute. God wants to tell him some more stuff. It's like, this is what you're focused on, but let me tell you what you should really be focused on. So watch this prophecy. After the 62 sevens, okay? So you leave those 62 sevens, right? Right? So there's 69. That means there's going to be one left. The anointed one. Now, who's the anointed one? Well, I think that's going to have to be Jesus, isn't it? He will be cut off and have nothing. When will Jesus be cut off and have nothing? At the cross. Is this prophecy pointing to the cross? Within these 77s, is the cross included here? Oh, yeah. Isn't this amazing? Where God is prophesying so many things in the book of Daniel. This is hundreds of years before they'll ever happen. Then it says the people of the ruler will come and will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And wait a minute, that wasn't Daniel's thoughts. Remember? He wasn't thinking about this. He wanted to get the temple rebuilt. That's going to be rebuilt. But then guess what? Somebody's going to come along and destroy the city and the temple. Calls him the ruler. Okay? Now, we know in history when that happened. Happened in 70 AD. Okay? So a long time after Daniel dies, buried, that temple, which will eventually get rebuilt, is coming down again. Okay? And then it says the end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. So this is firm. This is what is going to happen. There's going to be war. Okay? So, within these 77s, the anointed one will come. Matthew chapter 1. That's in about 4 BC. Okay? And then the anointed one will be cut off, having nothing. And then he will atone for wickedness. Well, Jesus atoned for our sins, didn't he? At the cross. He will put an end to sin. That's the first part of the verses we read in Daniel. Didn't that happen at the cross? He put an end to sin. And at the same time, did he not bring in everlasting righteousness, right? It's only through Jesus that we can be made righteous, and it's everlasting. First time in all of history that ever happened, right? And it says that he will, we're going to see this in a minute, he's going to confirm a covenant with many. Well, remember what Jesus said at the Passover meal to his apostles? This is the blood of the covenant. He is going to bring in a covenant, and that covenant will complete the entire covenant package, and it will end with the final covenant of Jesus, putting the whole package together. And what is all of this? This is all predicted in the book of Daniel before it ever happened, hundreds of years before it happened. So Daniel was worried about the temple back here. God says, okay, I'll give you your answer on that one. But let me tell you what's really important, what you really need to be focused on, because this is going to get you to heaven. Amazing what's in the book of Daniel. And that all happened in about 29 AD. Okay? So this is happening in the middle of that 7. Let's keep going. Verse 27. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offerings. So he's going to put an end to sacrifice and offerings. It's over. He is the sacrifice. He's it. He is the fulfillment of the sacrifices. No more animal sacrifices need to be done. Jesus is the fulfillment, right? That's what this is pointing to. And on a wing of the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Okay, interesting. On the wing of it, and on a wing, it adds here, of the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. Okay. Now this is interesting. So when we get over here to the next part, what's going to happen? Abomination of desolations. That the city, that God's people are going to finish transgressions. And we're going to see here in a minute, when we jump over to chapter 12, that the holy people will finally be broken. And the Bible says here that the end will come. It's going to come with a war. Where is this pointing to? And then it says also that the city and the sanctuary will be destroyed. This is at the end of this last set of 7s, this 1 7. This is pointing to the destruction of Jerusalem When? In 70 AD. That's what this is pointing to. Now, Daniel didn't want to know about all that, but God's putting this in here. Now, we're going to jump ahead because we're eventually going to go to Matthew 24. And it's going to tell us about the destruction of Jerusalem. But watch what it says here in Daniel chapter 24, verse 15. So when you see standing in the holy place. Wait a minute. The holy place? That's the temple, isn't it? Yes. The abomination that causes desolation. Spoken of through the prophet who? Daniel. Matthew is pointing back to Daniel here, okay? Let the reader understand. So what Matthew was talking about is what Daniel was talking about back in Daniel chapter 9. The abomination that causes desolation. Where's it going to be? It's going to be standing in the holy place. Well, guess what? Romans are going to come in 70 AD, and they're going to tear down that temple. Okay? Destroy it. But did you notice? Well, we're going to see in a second here. So, here it is. That abomination that causes desolation, 70 AD, is the same desolation that causes abomination in Daniel 9:27 and also 12:11. And it's pointing back to the book of Daniel. Isn't that interesting? So that is when these prophecies are being fulfilled. Okay? The destruction of Jerusalem. And what we'll see is it says in Daniel chapter 12, when God's holy people are finally broken. Guys, before we get to this section here, let me just try to explain this. Why would God want to destroy the temple again in 70 AD? Allow that to be destroyed. Because what are they doing in 70 AD? Jesus died in 29 AD. And he put an end to sacrifices and sin, right? Guess what they're doing all the way up to 70 AD? The Jews are still practicing animal sacrifices. Why? Because they've rejected Jesus. And so, war will come. Desolations have been decreed. And God is going to destroy this city. He's going to destroy the people. God's holy people will finally be broken. And when we get to the destruction of Jerusalem, you're going to see just how devastating things happened in 70 AD and how many Jews were killed. But here's the point. It's because they are rejecting Jesus. And so God is bringing this judgment down on his people. Now here's something that's very interesting. You know, in 70 AD, never again did the Jews practice animal sacrifices because they were unable to. And here's why. It's because they had no documentation. When you go back to the book of Nehemiah, that first time that they were trying to get the temple rebuilt, sacrifices going again, when the first destruction of Jerusalem took place, the only way that they could have a Levite come in, be a priest, and serve and officiate at the temple is that he had documentation to prove that he was from the tribe of Levi. Guess what happened in the destruction of Jerusalem? All the documentation was destroyed. So nobody could prove they were from the tribe of Levi anymore. And sacrifices ended. He finally broke his people. You see how that all fits? It's amazing. It's amazing. It's all in the book of Daniel. Okay. Now, that's all great. Great things to learn. Now we're going to shift gears. Okay? All right? So take that, digest all of that. Really good stuff. Major, major prophecy. Now we're going to move into another subject. When is a prophecy in its timing literal? When is it figurative? Okay? Now we saw what the Jehovah's Witnesses do with Daniel chapter 4. taking the 7 times and taking it out of context, trying to make it literal, do a bunch of math with it, and went off into an area that they should have never went in. We saw what the Seventh-day Adventists did in Daniel chapter 8. Same thing, 2,300 mornings and evenings, and they tried to make it literal and or actually change it to years and do a bunch of math with that, and so they destroyed that. What gives us the right to know when a prophecy is literal and when it's not? Okay, well, let's see. Context. This is so important. Okay, so think about this. Here we are, we're studying through the book of Daniel, Revelation, destruction of Jerusalem, whatever books you're looking at where there's prophecies. We have to look at context. Context, context, context. If making things literal within the context doesn't fit, then it's got to be figurative. Okay? So, if we go to Revelation, we get into Numbers, we're going to, and you leave context, you can make that thing say anything you want to, just like some of our other religious friends. It's the same in the book of Daniel. Context is going to tell you if it's literal or figurative. Okay? So let me give you some examples. When we looked at the 70-year captivity, remember, it was foretold in Jeremiah, talked about in Zechariah. We never looked at those verses, fulfilled in Ezra and Daniel 9. When we looked at that, it fit perfectly. That 70 years was literal because it fit the context. So the context tells us that was a literal prophecy. Okay? Now, when we got to the 2,300 evenings and mornings, when we're dealing over here in Daniel chapter 8, then we saw the fulfillment of Maccabees 1 and 2, these books that are outside of the Bible. Well, what did we see? Well, we were dealing with the Medes and the Grecians in Daniel chapter 8, right? And then from the Grecian Empire, that large horn was broke off. That's King Alexander the Great. 4 generals took over. 4 horns grew up, split the Grecian Empire into 4 sections. And then this little horn grows up. And this is Antiochus Epiphanes. And he goes down to the beautiful land and causes all kinds of havoc. This is where this was pointing to. Now, when we look at Antiochus Epiphanes, and you look back at Daniel chapter 8, and it says, how long will this take place? What did the Bible say? It said 2,300 mornings and evenings. That's 6 years and 4 months. And that happened between 169 BC and 163. This is when Antiochus Epiphanes started his persecution with Jerusalem, and this is where he died. And it all happened exactly 2,300 mornings and evenings. So, when you look at the context, it fit perfectly. So that is a literal prophecy. But what about when we went over here to the 7 times prophecy in Daniel 4? We're dealing with King Nebuchadnezzar here, right? Remember this guy? King Nebuchadnezzar was filled with pride. God's going to bring him down low. And how long is this going to take? 7 times. 7 times. Now, let's look at the verses. Daniel 4:25 and 27 says, you will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. That's King Nebuchadnezzar, okay? You will eat grass like cattle and be drenched with the dew of heaven. Okay? 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. So again, he has to get his act together. He has to humble himself. And once he does that, King Nebuchadnezzar is going to get his kingdom back. And what does the Bible call it? 7 times. Now, does that give you a beginning point and an ending point? Does it give you a date for when it's going to start, when it's going to end? No. The beginning point is when God sends them away, but the ending point is up to King Nebuchadnezzar. when he gets his act together. So in the context, this is not a literal period of time. And that's going to force us to get into the Bible and go, okay, does the number 7 have meaning? If you look at all the times that 7 is used in the Bible and you study them all out, does it have a meaning or a pattern? Does that 7 symbolize something? And we'll find out that it does, as do many other numbers in the Bible. Here's another one. We saw this over in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. We'll see it again in Daniel chapter 12, verse 7 next week. And it's going to show up in the book of Revelation. And it's going to come out several times in the book of Revelation, actually. Time, times, and half a time. So what is time? 1. What's times? 2. So 1 plus 2 equals what? 3. And then you add a half a time. 3 and a half. We saw this in Daniel chapter 7 when he's speaking about the Roman Empire here, okay? And what's going to happen with the Christians during this Roman Empire. Talking about this Caesar that's going to come. He will speak against the Most High, okay? That's what Caesar did, and oppress the saints and try to change the set times and laws. The saints will be handed over to him. How long? For a time, times, and half a time. 3 and a half. Now, what's going on here? This is Caesar Domitian. He's going to come in and he is going to kill more Christians than any other person on the planet. It says during his reign that they literally ran out of lumber for all the crucifixions. That's who it's talking about. But how long is this going to take place? For time, times, that's 3, and half a time, 3 and a half. Time, 1, plus 2, times, plus a half, 3 and a half. What is half of 7? 3 and a half. What does 7 symbolize in the Bible? Completeness. On day 7, God rested from his creation. Everything was complete. And you'll see that throughout the Bible, that meaning. So what's 3 and a half? Incomplete. So for some incomplete period of time, not giving you a beginning date, not giving you an ending date, for some incomplete period of time, the saints will be handed over to the Caesar and he will persecute them. So in the context, both here in Daniel and in Revelation, this is not a literal period of time. It just has meaning. Doesn't give you a starting date. Doesn't give you an ending date. Context is going to tell you that. And you got to go back and study the context. And then we can figure this out. It's not that difficult. Hey, there's some examples of when a prophecy is literal and when a prophecy is figurative. I know this is a little deep for us, but it's important for us because we don't want to end up like our religious friends, taking stuff out of context and then going into crazy land, right? We want to make sure that we can understand the Bible and understand it correctly. So we got to do our work, but we can do it. Stay with context and let the Bible interpret the Bible. Let the Bible tell you what 7 means. Let the Bible tell you what 3 and a half means. 4, 3, 10, 12. We're going to see all of these numbers in the book of Revelation. But let the Bible interpret the Bible, not us with our American minds. I hope this is helpful for us. I hope you're in classes this Sunday, but if you weren't able to make it, that's what this video is for. Or if you were in class and you just needed to go over things, just kind of slow it down a little bit. I hope you find these helpful, and do us all a favor. Take these videos and send them to your friends. Post them on your Facebook pages or wherever you go, and send them to your friends and get this out, because this is very important Bible studies. We will see you next week and hope you have a great Thanksgiving holiday. God be with you.